Hey everyone, I'm back with another Anatomy of Starcraft, and today we're talking about Protoss gross anatomy. Not going into any of their tech because obviously I'm unqualified to talk about that. Again, we're going to be using MS Paint because I am extremely lazy and untalented with graphics and all that stuff. I'd like to start off by thanking this name here on TeamLiquid.net for sending me some really awesome ideas and some preemptive material that I've included in this video. And then Kelthar on Battle.net contributed a little bit as well. So thank you very much. No thanks to River, who is currently in school and unavailable to do the video for me. So I'm going to start with looking at the faces and talking about the sexual dimorphism of the Protoss, which they actually appear to have two sexes, similar to, well, pretty much everything that you'd be familiar with on Earth, except for, some various microorganisms and things like that, and some parthenogenetic lizards as well. Basically, there are some differences in the face of the Protoss male and female. It's more of what's lacking in the female than in the male, which is the difference. The males have these really deep grooves and pits here on the top of the skull. The female's actually missing those. She does have a bit of grooves, but nothing like these big pits that we see here. The male also has some protrusions coming from the skull, giving it some nice basically ornamentation. Presumably this would function in a way similar to a deer's antler, where if they're bigger or smaller or shapelier or whatever, the female is going to be attracted to them, assuming that the female isn't the displayed gender in this case, and the males are the ones that are attracting the females. And that certainly seems to be the case because the males have more goodies on their head. The females also have these lateral psionic tendrils. Presumably they have a whole bunch in the back there as well, and the males just have them coming out the back. So they don't actually have that strange orientation that the females have. The female also has sort of a subdued brow ridge as well. The face is oriented, roughly speaking, in a more vertical fashion, so the chin doesn't come out as much, and so forth. So the male head in general is much shapelier, and that's really the most basic and obvious thing we can do because we don't really have the best gauge on this. So I'm going to also now talk about the bodies. From what I can tell, this here is a female. You can tell that because I think it's obvious that it's Celendis, and the face is a lot more subdued. It's less angular than what you're seeing in the generic Protoss. They also seem to be less muscular, so they're more slender and gracile. They could perhaps be shorter, though Protoss are like 7 feet tall. So yeah, they're pretty big regardless. So the male here is a really both of them are really hominiform, which means they're basically the same thing as humans in as far as anatomy goes. And this drives me crazy in science fiction design when they have a head on top of a spinal column with a shoulder girdle and a pelvic girdle, 2 legs, 2 arms, and they all often will give different like digit orientation. Like for example, they have 4 toes or 3 toes, with one of them sort of being zygodactylus, I believe. So it's pointing backwards, and they're sort of using it as a central platform for weight support, sort of like our heel. And then they've got the 2 toes outwards, which help with walking. And they've also got 2 thumbs, I believe, and 2 fingers. So basically just 4 fingers that oppose each other. And that's really the only difference. They even seem to have a humerus, radius and ulna. They do have one difference in the limb construction from humans, in that they obviously have a femur, they have probably a patella in there somewhere, and then the tibia and fibula, perhaps if they have one, they're kind of short. And the gastrocnemius, which is this muscle here, what you'd think of as the calf muscle, is rather subdued, meaning that their toes are basically what they're walking on here, and they seem to have they're pretty strongly digitigrade, in fact. So you can actually see here this here is technically the heel, and here's the toes, assuming that they're comparable to humans, in which, well, we are, because, well, look at them, they're pretty hominiform, and obviously based on humans, they have, the nice six-pack going on and all that. They don't seem to have any genitalia, though they do have a nice muscular buttocks, which I assume the celebrated anus is located in. They pretty much have a very similar upper body musculature to humans. The main difference is that they don't really have, they don't have a mouth, they don't have a nose, and this is something that, raises the question: how do they take in nutrients? Well, it's pretty obvious from lore, actually, that they are photosynthetic. They're probably chemosynthetic as well, which means that they take in various chemicals and produce various things like carbon or whatever they use. Their blood, I believe, is purple or blue or something like that, which just means that they use a different metal to sort of, well, it's something that several vertebrates do as well. I believe there's a lizard with green blood that uses copper, I think it is, instead of iron. So it's not something that's completely unheard of. It's just a different method of going about oxygen transference, which of course would be absorbed through the skin, which again isn't unheard of. Marine turtles actually absorb a ton of oxygen through their cloaca, which is their celebrated anus, and their skin, so that they don't actually have to come to the surface and breathe a whole bunch. The Protoss actually have nice binocular vision, so two eyes right in the same spot that we'd expect. And I mean, I find the Protoss to be extremely uncreative. One thing that's kind of cool about them, though, is the issue of these psionics. And it was suggested by, what's his name? This guy here, that perhaps it's a little bit more electrosensory. So, they have a certain thought, and that releases some sort of electrical signal, which would admittedly work better in water, but we work with what we have, right? And it would certainly not work that well in space, I don't think. So I think what's going on is they're using either pheromones, or I agree it could very well be a type of electrosensory organ. So they think something, and it changes not only their skin color, because their skin color does sort of change with mood apparently, but they also the thought is then transmitted through their tendrils. And this isn't unheard of on Earth. There is an animal, it's in the family Mormoridae, sorry. It's called the elephant fish. You've probably seen one at a pet store. In fact, I almost guarantee that you have. And they actually have the largest encephalization quotient, which means brain size to body size. They're only beaten by humans on Earth. They have really, really big brains, and the reason for this is they use very complicated electrosensory organs in this little trunk here. So the mouth is up here. This so-called trunk on this elephant nose fish is used to emit and sense electrical stimuli. And I actually knew somebody who was a pre-med student in neurology at Johns Hopkins who had the opportunity to work with these animals, and she told me that, yeah, basically they would stick electrical probes in and emit different I can't remember if it's amps or whatever the term is, different electrical signals basically, and they would elicit different responses. So a defensive response, a feeding response, and so forth. And so the fish actually would have sort of loose abilities to communicate, really. I mean, they'd work together and so forth. So that kind of makes sense as well. But overall, I'm really not impressed. Psionics is such a weaselly thing. It's basically magic as far as I'm concerned, and the Protoss themselves are very hominiform, and I find it quite narcissistic that humans would create them and say they've got purity of form. So in other words, they look strongly humanoid. And the Xel'Naga probably, almost certainly, according to what I've seen of the Dark Voice and things like this, they probably are also anthropomorphic. So it's really frustrating to me, because it's just what it really shows is that a lot of game designers, as far as I know, only have one mandatory anatomy class, and that is actually human anatomy, which is a great class. I loved human osteology. Awesome. I think everybody should have to take it, but they don't get a very good sense of comparative anatomy, and that's why we see the Protoss looking like basically people with just removed features or added psionic garbage. So there you have it, the Protoss. I was not too keen on doing this one, I'm going to be honest, but I got a lot of feedback. A lot of people wanted to see this, so I hope you enjoyed it.